Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guests, two guests. They're brothers. Their names are Philip and Paul Collins. And they wrote a book a while back, which I listened to some of their interviews. That book that they've talked a lot about in a lot of the interviews I listened to is titled The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to 21st centuries. That was published in 2006. And we're going to talk about a new book that they wrote last year. November 2020 was when it was published. The title of that book is Invoking the Beyond, the Kantian Rift, Mythologized Menaces, and the Quest for the New Man. It's a very long, very supremely well-researched book. It's 1,000 pages. I have not gotten through the entire book. Good news is that they've already agreed to talk about their book into two parts. So we're going to do the first part tonight and then schedule the second part later, so that gives them more time to kind of lay out their research. Philip D. Collins has acted as the editor for The Hidden Face of Terrorism. He's also written articles for Paranoia Magazine, MK Zine, newswithviews.com, and Biped, the official website of Darwinian Dissent and Conspiracy Archive. And then Paul David Collins is also an author of The Hidden Face of Terrorism, and he has received his associate in science degree from Clark State Community College and a major from Wright State University. He's worked as a professional journalist for 4 years, and he's written for many independent, smaller community publications such as the New Carlisle Sun, Tip City Herald, Beaver Creek News, Vandalia Drummer, Springboro Sun, and Fairborn Daily Herald, just to name a few. So again, the authors are Philip and Paul Collins, and the book we're going to talk about tonight is Invoking the Beyond, the Kantian Rift, Mythologized Menaces, and the Quest for the New Man. So Philip and Paul, are you there?
Yes, we are. Hey, thanks, Mr. Ramsey.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to the interview. I listened to you guys. We talked in the pre-show about Visigoth. You've done interviews then. You also had your own show. Some of those interviews are still bouncing around. Can you talk about, the ascendancy of the scientific dictatorship is prescient. It's obviously what's going on in the kind of current situation here in the U.S. Can you talk about that book and then what led you to write Invoking the Beyond?
Yeah, sure. Well, the ascendancy of the scientific dictatorship basically charts the course of the development and history of technocracy, which in classical political terms is the appellation assigned to a system of governance wherein technical and scientific experts rule by virtue of their specialized knowledge. These experts occupy lofty positions in economic and political institutions because they allegedly possess some vaguely defined gnosis or secret knowledge concerning the operations of the cosmos, the operations of the natural order. But the contention that scientists should seize the reins of governance, that rests upon the epistemological convictions of scientism, which is the belief that the investigational methods of the natural sciences can be applied to all fields of inquiry. Scientism holds that the natural sciences provide the only legitimate hermeneutical keys for understanding the world and reality. In short, it's basically epistemological imperialism. It eschews epistemological pluralism and basically holds aloft the quantitative and empirical approach of the physical sciences as the only means by which we can understand the cosmos. And through the prism of an exclusively scientific outlook, all forms of knowledge that cannot be derived through those means, through the quantitative and empirical methods, are unreliable at best or illusory at worst. So philosophical, metaphysical, and religious claims are automatically dismissed because they cannot be scientifically apprehended. So in short, the physical sciences are basically deemed the sole path to truth. Now, the one of the major problems with any form of governance that is premised upon the epistemological convictions of scientism and the technocratic paradigm is the fact that the quantitative and empirical approaches of the physical science do not really dignify humanity. It does nothing to ennoble it. In the words of B.F. Skinner, it dehomunculizes man. It divests man of any sort of ennobling qualities, any sort of dignity or intrinsic value. In the scientifically regimented state, the citizen becomes little more than an amalgam of behavioral repertoires whose every thought, feeling, and idea is basically the product of external stimuli. And from this scientific vantage point, the populace's motives can be calculated, they can be systematized, thereby allowing a few conditioners who are accountable to no moral master to develop economic and technological stimuli that can produce the desired patterns of mass behavior. Aldous Huxley described such a societal model as a scientific dictatorship, which is an appellation that can be used interchangeably with technocracy. With Invoking the Beyond, which is the follow-up to the ascendancy of the scientific dictatorship, we wanted to examine the means by which the power elite and their technocratic theoreticians legitimize their hegemony. And in the book, what we basically examine is the Beyond, which is a narrative device that they invoke in order to basically overwhelm national governments epistemologically and ontologically. And this invocation precipitates the subsequent introduction of a deus ex machina in the form of a technocratic world state. And of course, such a global managerial system would be an advantageous arrangement to only an elite few who basically lay claim, again, to some vaguely defined socio-political gnosis that qualifies them to lead humanity into a glorious transfiguration, into the emergence of a new man. But the Beyond, it basically resulted from what we dub the Kantian Rift, which is a neologism that we assign to the epistemological disjunction between phenomena, or that is to say, appearances, and noumenon, that is to say, the thing in itself. And this bifurcation was imposed upon epistemology by the Enlightenment theoretician Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, he lived from 1724 to 1804, and he was one of the most influential theoreticians of the Enlightenment, and he set into motion this entire epistemological revolution. In Kantian terms, and this is where it becomes a little bit confusing, but clarity of definitions is very important in philosophical conversations. So, in Kantian terms, when we talk about phenomenon, phenomena within the context of Kantian epistemology are objects that are discerned through sense perception, which supposedly structures external reality in this manner that's potentially disproportionate with reality. It's potentially illusory, and thus phenomena just really amounts to nothing more than mere appearances. And man can only infer so much from these observable occurrences. He must, however, maintain this overall agnosticism, epistemic incertitude concerning the true nature of those objects that are portrayed by phenomena. So the external world really becomes a mirage. Phenomena are just nothing more than, in Platonic terms, the shadows dancing upon the caves of the wall. They're just vague representations of the actual objects. In contradistinction, noumenon refers to objects that must be discerned independent of sense perception. And it's with Kant's invocation of this term that all of a sudden we're confronted with a considerable amount of terminological inexactitude, because noumenon, that term in the pre-Kantian world of ancient philosophy, actually occupied the transcendent order and was typically discerned through intuitive reasoning. For example, Platonic ideas and forms, they qualify as noumena. Proclus, who was the Platonic realist, He regarded the forms as thoughts within the mind of God. That was considered noumenon. But Kant redefined noumenon as the Ding an sich, or in the original German, the thing in itself, objects as they actually exist, apart from man's potentially deceptive faculties of empirical observation. Now, on Kant, humanity's perception of the empirical world is restricted to trustworthy representations. So basically, gone is the beautiful creation of the biblical Genesis account that God deemed good. Gone is the harmonious cosmos of ancient Greek philosophy. All that remains is this alien world of appearances. Man can have no experience apart from that which is already framed for him and structured for him by the spatio-temporal matrix. So we basically become lost cartographers who sculpt these mental maps of reality that are woefully suboptimal, potentially disproportionate with the actual reality. And so we have this epistemological barrier that severs the adequation between the human mind and reality. And we call that epistemological barrier the Kantian Rift. And obviously, with such an epistemology holding sway, the world becomes a dysteleological world. It becomes a meaningless, purposeless world. Because if you can have no knowledge of it, if it's perennially imperceptible, then there's nothing, there's no ontological truth we can grasp about it. So it becomes absurd. It becomes again, a meaningless, purposeless, dysteleological cosmos. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it echoes the cosmological sentiments of an ancient heresy that was ubiquitous in Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple in AD 70. Many scholars argue that this heresy probably originated prior to the temple's destruction, but its influence was almost certainly strengthened by the pervasive despair that we saw engendered and endemic to that catastrophic event, endemic to the fall of the temple.
Right,
and,
70 AD, right.
Yes. And because after all, if the temple's fall, according to Jewish apocalypticism, that basically intimated the ostensible failure of Jewish prophecy. Jewish apocalypticism basically came apart, was atomized by that, and then it appeared to them as the nullification of God's covenant with his chosen people. So if God's promises no longer held sway, then there was good reason to doubt his involvement with the created order. So of course, a world that's ontically divorced from its creator invariably succumbs to cosmological pessimism. And such cosmological pessimism was endemic to Gnosticism, which challenged the early Christian church. And Gnosticism basically, to give a relatively truncated presentation concerning Gnosticism, because I don't want to, become too tangential. Gnosticism basically ontologized corruption. It ontologized evil. It assigned evil a positive ontological status. And in so doing, it arrived at this cosmological pessimism wherein the world, the physical world, was regarded as nothing more than a deceptive simulacrum, ontologically deficient, created by basically an incompetent and grossly misled God who was a lower emanation of Sophia, who represented wisdom. And so we see Gnosticism basically making its way into the modern era through Immanuel Kant. He basically reiterates the Gnostic epistemology, and the reason being is because the 18th century Enlightenment was, for all practical purposes, a Gnostic revival. You have this, right. You have these elements of Gnosticism being espoused by various various Enlightenment theoreticians.
Right, but sorry to interrupt, but I think if I remember correctly, one of the epistles or one of the Paul's things was addressing Gnostic ideas, which believes that man's knowledge is the way to salvation.
Right.
And it's man-centered instead of God providing salvation. I think you make that point in the intro to your book.
Right.
There's a distinction. So it's the tree of knowledge, not the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And you see that theme all the way through Kant, Enlightenment, to the occultists of the present day, who still say, it's even Leary, it's about the tree of knowledge. Well, but that's a very important distinction between the tree of knowledge and the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Modern day occultists, like you say, have acted as a transmission belt, but Gnosticism is so pervasive that you even find it in geopolitical circles. You find it in foreign policy circles. If you look at two of the major conduits for the oligarchs today, the neoliberals and the neoconservatives, both of those conduits, both of those elite conduits, have very significant Gnostic elements in what they believe.
Or if you want to even go that far, look at big tech. Look at some of these people who are tech guys. They are, in a way, Gnostics. They are using their knowledge to create the world that they think is better, not sensible cosmos as laid out by a benevolent God, but the opposite of that.
Right, absolutely. With Gnosticism, the newer Gnosticism of modernity, that where it distinguishes itself from the older Gnosticism. The older Gnosticism just embraced this explicit cosmological pessimism, this explicit loathing for the material world. The newer Gnosticism basically regards the world more so as something like a dilapidated habitation in need of renovation, and that renovation is to be effected by the theoretician who supposedly can lay claim to a gnosis, to a secret knowledge that would basically allow them to resculpt history or resculpt the world according to the
and you also kind of use the terms gnosis and occultist kind of overlapping, right? Like it's almost like their secret occult knowledge.
Right. And occultism, that's basically what the word occultism means, is secret. And it's a secret body of knowledge. But you see with the modern Gnostics, what they basically do is they transpose the eschaton, that is the end of days, into the immanent sphere, and you have this succession of theoreticians that would affect that transposition of the eschaton, beginning with Joachim of Fior, then on to Jakob Boehm, from Jakob Boehm on to Hegel, and from Hegel, of course, to Karl Marx. And then, as Paul mentioned earlier, to the neoliberals and the neoconservatives, all of whom are seeking to, in the words of Eric Voegelin, immanentize the eschaton, to bring about heaven on earth, which would be at variance with the Gnosticism of the ancient world, because the Gnosticism of the ancient world sought to escape the world. These newer Gnostics now seek to change it, to renovate it, and they regard the world as being a malleable, just a malleable ball of clay that is basically susceptible to their enlightened, the enlightened brushstrokes of their utopian schematics. But at any rate, so it's with that we have with this world that has been basically rendered imperceptible and completely and totally unknowable. We have the emergence of these modern myth makers, these new myth makers, who basically invoke the beyond. They invoke this force, a deific force that has supplanted the God of Christianity, of Orthodox Christianity, and has basically been invoked in several different forms. We study the Beyond, I believe, in 4 iterations. We study it as the wrathful Earth Goddess, which of course is an invocation used with the radical environmentalist movement, which of course is advantageous to the power elite because they basically advance systems of technological apartheid and population control. We examine it as the technological singularity, which of course is the techno rapture, part of the eschatology of the transhumanists, who again, yeah, as you said, qualify as a modern form of Gnosticism. We examine it as the super weapon, which the super weapon, of course, it began off relatively nebulous. It had assumed various forms as beam weapons, as as poisonous gases, various forms of mechanized warfare, and then finally as the atom bomb, which interestingly enough was a neologism coined by H.G. Wells, who frequented a great many of these elitist circles and did kind of act as an expositor of much of their theories, of much of their doctrines, sometimes in a fictional form. And it was in the book, for instance, The World Set Free, that we foresee the appearance of the neologism of the atom bomb. And then lastly, and the most fantastical form that we see the Beyond being invoked as are extraterrestrial gods.
Right, and it's right there in your cover. So you have this very kind of modern view of, this myth of these beings, and it kind of overlaps too with some of these science fiction writers too, right? Like Arthur C. Clarke. Right. They're bolstering all of these kind of ideas.
Right. Well, extraterrestrials, and what we begin off with in our examination of the extraterrestrial gods, the Beyond invoked as the extraterrestrial gods, they're often portrayed by these science fiction writers as ethereal and spiritually advanced beings, as is evidenced by the tacitly angelic presentation of interplanetary visitors in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But this angelic motif actually originated with another Enlightenment theoretician by the name of Jacob Levy, who was an Enlightenment era pamphleteer. He was a printer, and he promulgated this odd neo-Gnostic narrative between 1730 and 1750. And this narrative can be found in works such as the layman's Vindication of the Christian Religion and the oration Spoke at Joiner's Hall, wherein Levy transposes the eschaton of heaven and hell into the vacuum separating celestial bodies, namely space. But Levy echoes the cosmological pessimism of his ancient Gnostic antecedents, claiming that the earth is quote unquote hell, that is to say, the place inferior to heaven. And Levy expresses distinctly teleological contention that the earth is bereft of any purpose, that it has no meaning, no purpose, it serves no function. He says no order of higher beings or no order of beings was created to people it. So in other words, it just simply is. And this demonic portrayal of the world was clearly derivative of ancient Gnostic cosmology, which again resulted from the Gnostics' assignment of positive ontological status to evil. But at any rate, this is the dominant hermeneutic according to which the UFO phenomena is understood. You will see it throughout several works of fiction, Arthur C. Clarke in particular, with 2001: A Space Odyssey, also especially prevalent in Childhood's End, which is basically Gnostic cosmology distilled as a work of science fiction. You see it espoused in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But it's also the hermeneutic that is advanced by the intelligence community, and the intelligence community is in large measure responsible for the perpetuation of this extraterrestrial myth, which is advantageous again to the para-elite, because the extraterrestrial gods basically overwhelm national governments ontologically and epistemologically. It leaves parliaments, representative forms of governments, republics with no way of addressing now the broader a broader cosmic community. And so you have a crisis of either diplomacy or a crisis of military intervention. The crisis of diplomacy is where no one nation state can speak for Earth. As Stanton Friedman put it, no, who speaks for Earth? Argentina. And so implicit in that aphorism is the contention that a global superstate, a technocratic superstate, is the only governmental structure that would be efficient enough to address this broader cosmic community that we've just now become a member of. And then the military dilemma is if those aliens happen to be of a demonic variety. Again, we have the angelic motif, and the aliens can be either angelic or demonic, or fallen angels. And they wish to exterminate us. They wish to carry out a campaign of genocide. Then the only means by which such a threat can be addressed is by amalgamating all nation states into a global technocratic system, so that all of our combined forces might stop the alien invasion. And those are the two narrative paradigms that are advanced by the para-elite as rationales for the perpetuation of their hegemony, for the instantiation of the form of global governance that they seek to see enshrined. But throughout that chapter of the book, we document several instances of intelligence community, intelligent various personas that people the intelligence community and the intelligence milieus, their involvement in the perpetuation of this alien myth.
Right, and that's like what, Blue Book? Can you go deeper into that? What has the intelligence agents done? I mean, if you look at some of the culture and even the cover of your book, so many of these alien invasions and stuff, they involve the heads of nation states. The White House gets blown up, or all these. It's almost like there's the New World Order myth, or the furtherance of those concepts through representations through Hollywood that people are seeing, where the narrative may not be as overt as they think. But what else has the intelligence agencies been involved in perpetuating this alien myth?
Well, if you look at the UFO phenomenon, as we do as a mostly terrestrial based deception, we do see some preternatural elements to it, but that's in kind of synergistically working along with what is essentially a terrestrial based deception. One thing you always recognize is that the UFO deception campaign is characterized by function stacking, and function stacking is a term that appears to have been coined by the permacultural community, but it has application when we look at things like UFOs. And function stacking, it's defined as an element in an operation that serves more than one function. It serves multiple functions. And UFOs do just that. They serve multiple functions. And so there were three functions that we looked into. The first one was that they concealed the test of experimental aircraft and other covert technologies most people, are familiar with that function.
Right.
The second function is that they help conceal criminal intelligence operations, such as drug trafficking, gun running, sexual entrapment and blackmail rings, eugenics campaigns, regime change, etc. Whenever these intelligence crimes start to come out, it's the darker side of the intelligence community will start to intermingle into those revelations. They'll start to intermingle UFO disinformation, and thus lead the researcher down an evidentiary cul-de-sac. Because he starts off on the researcher starts off on a really good trajectory, starts off on a really good course, and then they get pulled. They get pulled aside or pulled to one way or the other by disinformation, by this UFO disinformation. But the third and the most significant, in our opinion, is that of the functions is that served by the UFOs is that they advance a social engineering agenda. They're used to bring about the radical reconfiguration of civilization, and we believe, and we state this in the book, that most, if not all, UFO deceptions are used by the darker elements of the intelligence community, because I don't want to mislead the audience or have the audience labor under the belief that the entire intelligence community is evil, or no, that's there are some very good people working within the intelligence community, good people working within a bad system. And then there's the criminalized element. But these criminal intelligence circles use almost all UFO deceptions to serve that third function. Some of the manufactured UFO incidents may have been concocted to serve one of the first two functions, or both, but they eventually go on to be employed to condition humanity to make a radical break from the past. So social engineering involving UFOs, it appears to have become extremely significant in late 1940. It may have very well taken place in years prior, but the final years of the 40s seemed to be when it really came to a head, when it really became the most prominent. At that time, the prior incarnation of the Beyond, the super weapon Philip brought up earlier, appears to have begun to act as a kind of midwife for the UFO manifestation of the Beyond. And in the book, we support this contention with a passage found in the appendix to a 1949 report released by Project Sign. And any UFO buffs out there already know about Project Sign, but it was what Project Sign was. It was an official on the subject of UFOs that was conducted by the United States Air Force, and in the Project Sign's report, there was a letter from Dr. James Lip. Lip was an aeronautical engineer and a department head at the RAND Corporation, which was it's still around. It's an American nonprofit global policy think tank. The RAND Corporation was the epicenter for a lot of radical ideas regarding nuclear exchange and nuclear war. For instance, in 1963, the RAND Corporation produced a report that would serve as the foundation for Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara's policy of mutually assured destruction, MAD. And MAD would go on to become a kind of national security centerpiece during the Cold War. It basically held that in the event of a nuclear exchange, both the aggressor and the defender are destroyed, and so because both hold within their means the nuclear capabilities of destroying. Both adversaries hold the means and the capability to destroy one another in a nuclear exchange. So
that acts as the ultimate deterrent.
Yeah. MAD is widely considered to be the theory of deterrence put into practice. But like many other Cold War policies, MAD was characterized by function stacking. So while it did, in fact, discourage both major superpowers from entertaining the notion of a nuclear exchange, it also allowed the global oligarchical establishment, the world's power elite, to basically universally impose what we term nuclear anxiety. Nuclear anxiety is this kind of pervasive, obsessive fear of nuclear extinction. And once the global oligarchical establishment induced this nuclear kind of fever dream, an extended period of nuclear extortion took place. And sometimes nuclear extortion could even be found in different cultural artifacts, whether you talk about you're talking about Mad Max or the movie the Day After, which we go into extensively. It really came that nuclear extortion really came to permeate the cultural landscape and all. But nuclear extortion, all the movies and popular portrayals of it, all that aside, it is very much real. Nuclear extortion is very much real, and it was deployed to advance this agenda that was basically to blackmail people, blackmail the population.
Right. It was social engineering, right?
What's that, sir?
It was a kind of social engineering.
Yeah.
It was used to keep people in line. The enemy's over there. We could get nuked. We have to pay for this. You guys have to keep doing this, and don't challenge the social order, or else we're all going to get incinerated.
Right. And to basically accept a one world government, a technocratic one world government, as the only viable alternative to nuclear extinction. And so we had this connection of Rand to Project Sign, and this indicates that to us, and we point this out in the book, that the nuclear fetishist that cultural historian Bruce Franklin calls the cult of the superweapon were endeavoring to breathe life into a new incarnation of the beyond. And Lip's letter, his in the appendix to the Project Sign report, demonstrates he was clearly a skeptic regarding UFOs. He pointed out that the UFO reports in 1947 and 1948, they really weren't that impressive. If you were looking for evidence of interplanetary travel, they really didn't. He then, however, goes on in that letter to provide the foundation for the exploitation of the belief in interplanetary travelers. The foundation is found in one of the theories he advances in that letter. Lip contended that there might be a causal relationship between atomic bomb tests and the appearance of UFOs. He asserted that if real, interplanetary travelers came to our solar system and they were drawn to Earth by the detonation of nuclear devices. And Lip's theory included Martian telescopes visually detecting an A-bomb explosion at Alamogordo and Hiroshima. Now, Lip didn't seem to describe his own theory. As a matter of fact, he points out many of its deficiencies in the very same letter that he posits this theory. Put quite simply, Lip believed Martians would find observing Earth to be rather boring. He thought it would be a mundane exercise to spend long periods of time just watching this primitive planet. All of that aside, however, Lip had either intentionally or unintentionally, we can't determine which, contributed to a narrative that would be used to manipulate the UFO community for years and years to come. It was also used to deceive the public, generally speaking. Social engineers within what has been termed the deep state, introduced to the public imagination the notion that interplanetary travelers had detected our nuclear activities and were now visiting Earth with both benign and sinister intentions, depending on which extraterrestrial race you were discussing. And the hands of these social engineers can be detected almost immediately following Project Sign, as the UFO contactee phenomenon began to emerge. Nuclear anxiety was a very common thematic thread running through the accounts of contactees. According to the contactees of the 50s, the aliens had come to warn us that we needed to cease our nuclear test. The atomic test, the aliens were leaking radiation, was having an adverse effect on our planet specifically, but the solar system, generally speaking, it was disrupting the solar system's delicate balance. And as far as we're concerned, the contactee's message held too much in common with Lip's theory to be accidental.
Wow, yeah. No, it's incredible. It's still going on to this day, even all the To the Stars Academy and all that stuff. There's all kinds of Intel figures around there. So this is not something that is in declination or descent. It's still going on. There's still people manipulating this myth. And I also think one element is another thing is that if there are extraterrestrials, then the biblical worldview is diminished, right? So there's other entities, and the idea of man being in between heaven and hell, all those things are, eroded.
It undermines it considerably. It's a leap of logic, but it still has traction with people today. This notion that because this race, alleged race, has traversed a sea of stars and come from far away, another solar system all the way to here, they must also have superior spiritual knowledge, and they might possess.
Yeah, it's a gnosis, but it's a gnosis they possess just by virtue of geography and nothing more. For some reason, because they're from another world, that automatically must mean that they're in possession of spiritual insights that we don't possess, as human beings. And basically, you see with this, new interpretation of space. This again, the transposition of the eschaton, the space now, that vacuum that separates celestial bodies now becomes essentially heaven, and those beings that traverse the expanse therein are now just spiritually enlightened, and in some cases, in the case of directed panspermia, the theories of directed panspermia, it's believed that they were in fact collectively God, that they had created humanity.
Yeah, it's the same theme in the Alien series. And what was the movie where the guy comes to Earth and he lands in DC and warns?
Yes, the Day the Earth Stood Still.
The Day the Earth Stood Still. So there you go. The same theme. This kind of enlightened being who has tremendous power.
Right. Well, basically, Klaatu, the central alien character of that particular story, is nothing more than a sort of exotheological Christ. And as a matter of fact, one of the name that he assumes as a human being is Carpenter, which of course is a rather conspicuous allusion to Jesus the Carpenter. I know, and we don't necessarily go into this in the book, and we're going to expand upon what we say in chapter 7 of the book about UFOs in either an article or a follow-up, volume. The director of that film, Daryl Zanuck, he was part of the National Committee for Free Europe, which was a front for the Central Intelligence Agency.
I remember that.
And he had worked as a writer He had wrote more than 40 scripts during the 1920s for Warner Brothers, and then moved on to head of production there. And in 1933, he left Warner Brothers after he had studied. He and Jack Warner had a dispute over his salary, but he then partnered with Joseph Schrank and started 20th Century Fox, and he and Schrank would transfer the production company they would transform that production company into a very, very powerful force to be reckoned with within the motion picture industry, especially in 1935 when they bought Fox Studios, which had gone bankrupt, and merged it with 20th Century to form 20th Century Fox Film Corporations. But Zanuck became much more than just a major film producer. When America entered World War II in 1941, Zanuck gained an intelligence background because he was commissioned as a colonel in Army Signals Intelligence Corps. And he placed his film company at the disposal of the United States government. And 20th Century Fox began just turning out films that were made with the supervision of the Office of War Information, OWI, which is a government agency engaged in very large-scale information propaganda. And in Zanuck's mind, filmmaking and propagandizing really became one and the same thing. He merged the two, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Motion picture art and information warfare and persuasion became one and the same in Zanuck's psychology.
So it goes all the way back, right from the inceptions of the film industry. All that stuff, war propaganda, social engineering, really started all the way back then, 70 years ago. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, you look at the production of The Day the Earth Stood Still, and, you read the various accounts of that production, and you find out that Zanuck, he wanted a very almost documentary, very gritty, very realistic style to it. He wanted the audience to buy that this was an actual visitation. This was an actual, UFO event. That the aliens were real. He wanted the audience to feel like they were viewing something that was very real. Of particular importance to Zanuck was the now famous speech when Klaatu lands his spacecraft in the nation's capital, and he delivers his message to the Americans and the rest of humanity. While discussing this scene with the movie's producer, Julian Blaustein, and the movie's screenwriter, which I believe was Edmund North, Zanuck directed them to, quote, treat it as realistically as you possibly can, unquote. So once again, he wanted this documentary style to this UFO land scene. He even told North and Blaustein the following, quote, "You should suddenly hear radio programs being interrupted with startling flash announcements from Washington, New York, Los Angeles, etc. The whole nation is listening in," unquote. So he wanted people to buy that a UFO visitation, that alien visitation of Earth was a very real possibility.
Yeah, imminent, like it could happen anytime, right?
Exactly.
Guys, I hate to interrupt, but I got another interview in 5 minutes, and we haven't really even gotten into the kind of quest for the new man, Darwin, Marx. There's a lot of other themes that are involved in this book. Where is the best place for people to get Invoking the Beyond?
The best place they can get it is off iUniverse. That's the publisher. iUniverse.com. Just go there, enter Invoking the Beyond into the search engine. For the print copy, the price is a wee bit exorbitant. Again, we didn't set the price. It was actually set by the publisher, I'm assuming, to cover printing costs. So if that's a bit too much for you, you can also check out the electronic version, which is only $2.99.
And where is the best? Do you guys have a website or social media? People want to reach out to you if they have their questions?
Heretofore, right now, we have a platform on www.conspiracyarchive.com, which is maintained by Terry Melanson. But in the next month or so, we will be launching our own website. So right now, the best place, though, to go for most of our work is at Conspiracy Archive. That will soon change.
conspiracyarchive.com. You're going to have a new website up. I'll put a Conspiracy Archive in the show notes, and I'll set up another time where you can come back and kind of continue talking about this very detailed, very well-researched book, Invoking the Beyond. But thank you so much for your time, Paul and Philip D. Collins.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Keep in touch. All right, stay there. Stay there.